The Battle of Stalingrad is one of the most important battles in human history. It was a long and terrible fight between the German army and the Soviet army during World War II. This battle lasted for more than 5 months, from July 1942 to February 1943. Millions of soldiers fought here, and many never returned home. The battle changed the direction of World War II and stopped the German advance deep into the Soviet Union. Stalingrad was important because it was a major industrial city. It produced tractors, weapons, and supplies for the Soviet army. It also had the name of the Soviet leader Joseph Stalin, making it a symbolic target for the German dictator Adolf Hitler. Hitler wanted to capture the city to break Soviet morale and to prove that Germany was unstoppable. In the summer of 1942, the German army launched a massive attack towards southern Russia. They wanted to control rich oil fields in the Caucasus region. These oil fields were important because the German war machine needed huge amounts of fuel for tanks, planes, and trucks. Without this fuel, Germany could not continue fighting for long. Capturing Stalingrad was part of this big plan. The Soviet Union was already suffering heavy losses in the war. Cities like Kiev, Minsk, and Smolensk had already been captured by the German army in the first year of the conflict. The Soviets were desperate to stop the Germans somewhere. They knew if Stalingrad fell, the German army could advance deeper into the Soviet heartland. In late July 1942, German troops reached the western side of the Volga River near Stalingrad. The city stood on the riverbank, stretched long and narrow. The only way the Soviet army could bring supplies into the city was by crossing the Volga under constant danger from German artillery and aircraft. On August 23, 1942, the German Air Force launched a massive bombing attack on Stalingrad. Thousands of bombs fell on the city. Houses, factories, and streets were destroyed. The whole city turned into a burning, smoking ruin. More than 40,000 civilians died in this bombing alone. But even after so much destruction, the city did not surrender. After the bombing, Stalingrad became a broken landscape of rubble, broken walls, and burnt factories. But this destruction helped the Soviet army. The ruins made it difficult for German tanks to move. Soldiers had to fight street by street, room by room. The city became a maze of concrete and twisted metal. The man in charge of defending the city was Soviet General Vasily Zaitsev. He was tough, aggressive, and willing to fight until the last breath. His strategy was simple. Do not let the Germans use their strength. Get as close to the enemy as possible so their planes and artillery cannot help them. He called this tactic hugging the enemy. On the German side, the attack on Stalingrad was led by Friedrich Paulus, commander of the German Sixth Army. Paulus was known as a careful, disciplined officer, but Stalingrad would become the biggest challenge of his life. He believed he could capture the city quickly. He was wrong. By early September 1942, German troops began entering the city. They expected a quick victory, but instead, they entered a deadly battlefield. Soviet soldiers were hiding in every ruined building, basement, and trench. Snipers waited on rooftops. Machine guns were hidden in dark corners. Stalingrad was not like normal battles fought in open fields. This was a brutal fight inside houses, factories, staircases, and burned-out apartments. Soldiers sometimes fought for a single room for hours. They used grenades, knives, bayonets, and even hand-to-hand combat in the narrow spaces. Even though the Germans captured most of the city, the Soviets refused to surrender. Every day, more Soviet soldiers crossed the Volga River under heavy fire to reinforce the city. The Germans called the Soviet defenders rats, because they seemed to appear from every hole and crack in the ruins. The Battle of Stalingrad now became one of the closest and most violent battles in history. The German army tried to capture the city one street at a time. The Soviet army fought back with everything they had. Sometimes the soldiers fought for a single staircase, a single basement, or even just a few meters of broken ground. Every small space became important. One of the most famous battles happened at the Stalingrad grain elevator, a huge concrete building used for storing wheat. A small group of Soviet soldiers defended it. They were surrounded by German troops and tanks, but they held their position for days, refusing to surrender. Even when they had no food or water left, they continued fighting. Another key battleground was the Red October factory, which produced steel. The factory was full of broken machines, metal parts, and dark smoky rooms. German and Soviet soldiers fought inside this maze-like building. The noise of gunfire, explosions, and metal echoing through the factory made the battle extremely terrifying. The Dzerzhinsky tractor factory was also a critical location. The Soviets produced tanks here even while the battle was happening. Some tanks came out of the factory and went straight into combat with their paint still wet. The factory became a battlefield full of smoke, oil, broken machinery, and dead bodies. Both sides suffered huge losses. The ruins of the city created the perfect environment for snipers. One of the most famous snipers was Vasily Zaitsev, who became legendary during the battle. He killed hundreds of enemy soldiers and inspired the Soviet defenders. Snipers made the streets extremely dangerous. Soldiers were afraid to raise their heads even for a second. Many battles took place at night. The soldiers fought in almost complete darkness, using only muzzle flashes and small fires as light. Night fighting was confusing and terrifying. Sometimes soldiers did not know if the person in front of them was an enemy or a friend. Screams, explosions, and burning buildings filled the night. One of the most famous defensive points was Pavlov's house, named after Yakov Pavlov, who led a small group of soldiers. They turned an apartment building into a fortress. They blocked windows, set up machine guns, and placed mines all around. The German army attacked it again and again for 2 months, but never captured it. Pavlov's house became a symbol of Soviet resistance. By October 1942, the German commander Friedrich Paulus was becoming frustrated. He expected the city to fall quickly, but the Soviets refused to give up. The Sixth Army was fighting constantly, losing soldiers every day. The Germans were tired, cold, and running out of supplies. But Hitler ordered Paulus to keep attacking, no matter the cost. Adolf Hitler became obsessed with capturing Stalingrad. He refused to let his generals retreat or regroup. He believed capturing the city was a matter of pride. He sent orders demanding the soldiers take the city at any cost. Because of this, the German army was trapped in a deadly fight that consumed thousands of lives for very little gain. Meanwhile, Soviet General Georgy Zhukov was planning something bigger. While the Germans focused on attacking inside the city, Zhukov brought huge numbers of fresh Soviet troops to the areas outside Stalingrad. These troops would later become part of a massive counterattack. Inside the city, General Vasily Zhukov and his exhausted soldiers held the last few neighborhoods on the banks of the Volga River. They were almost pushed into the river, but they never let the Germans take those final positions. Every hour, more Soviet soldiers crossed the river to help defend the line. Many died even before reaching the shore. In November 1942, winter arrived in Stalingrad. Temperatures dropped below -20 degrees Celsius. Water froze instantly. Guns jammed. Wounded soldiers froze to death if not treated quickly. The ruins were covered in snow and ice, making movement difficult. Winter became a new enemy for both sides, but the Germans suffered the most because they were not prepared for the freezing weather. The German army began running out of food, ammunition, and winter clothing. Supplies had to travel long distances and were constantly attacked by Soviet planes and partisans. Many German soldiers had only thin uniforms meant for summer. The cold made them weak and sick. They knew they could not survive much longer without help. By the end of October and early November, Stalingrad had become a nightmare. Dead bodies were everywhere, frozen in strange shapes. Buildings were full of smoke, ash, and dust. Explosions happened every few minutes. There was no clean water, no safe shelter, no quiet place. Soldiers lived in dark basements filled with rats, blood, and the smell of death. What the Germans did not know was that the Soviets were preparing a huge surprise. They allowed the Germans to get deeper into the city, but outside the city, Soviet armies were surrounding them slowly. A massive counterattack was coming soon, one that would change the entire course of the war. The Soviet leaders understood that Stalingrad could not fall. Losing the city would destroy Soviet morale and open the road to the oil fields. Joseph Stalin ordered every available soldier, tank, and gun to move toward the city. The Soviet command created a new defensive line and called it "not one step back." This meant every soldier must fight until the last moment. No retreat, no surrender. Day after day, trains packed with soldiers arrived near Stalingrad. Many were young recruits with almost no training. They carried old rifles or sometimes no weapon at all. Still, they were told that defending the city was more important than their own lives. When they stepped off the trains, they could already hear the explosions in the distance and see the sky turning black with smoke. The only safe way into the city was across the Volga River. Soviet boats carried men, food, and ammunition under heavy enemy fire. Many boats never made it across, but they kept going. The river became known as the lifeline of Stalingrad. At night, soldiers crossed in silence, listening to the distant sound of bombs falling on the city they were about to fight for. When the reinforcements reached the city, they found chaos everywhere. Many buildings were already destroyed. Streets were covered with rubble. Soviet commanders quickly placed their new forces in defensive positions, inside broken buildings, behind piles of bricks, or even inside basements. The soldiers were told they must hold the line at any cost. As the German army pushed deeper into Stalingrad, Soviet snipers began to play a major role. They hid in the shadows of destroyed buildings and waited patiently for their targets. One shot could stop an entire German unit from advancing. The snipers gave the Soviet troops hope, proving that even a smaller force could slow down the enemy. Stalingrad streets became a deadly maze. Rubble made it harder for tanks to move. Smoke made it difficult to see. Every building, every corner, and every empty room became a battleground. German units moved slowly because they never knew where a Soviet soldier might appear. The city itself was fighting against them. Soon the battle became extremely close. Soldiers fought in the hallways of broken apartment blocks, inside factories, and even room to room. Sometimes the distance between the two armies was less than 10 meters. They could hear each other breathing. The war was no longer about large movements. It was about surviving each moment. As German forces moved into the center of Stalingrad, they expected quick victory. But the city greeted them with heavy resistance. Soviet fighters hid in every broken building, waiting for the Germans to come close. Every step the Germans took forward cost them time, energy, and lives. The city center became a deadly trap, forcing the Germans to fight for every street. One of the toughest places was the Red October factory. This massive industrial plant was destroyed by bombing, yet it became a strong defensive base for Soviet soldiers. They fought among metal beams, broken machines, and piles of twisted steel. The sounds of battle echoed through the empty halls, making the place feel like a giant steel battlefield. Another fierce battle happened at the Stalingrad grain elevator. The building was tall and strong, giving whoever held it a clear view of the area around it. A small group of Soviet soldiers defended it for days against multiple German attacks. Even when they ran out of water and food, they refused to surrender. Their resistance shocked the Germans. One of the most famous defenders was Sergeant Yakov Pavlov. His group took control of a 4-story apartment building and turned it into a fortress. They blocked the windows with sandbags, set up machine guns, and even dug communication trenches. For nearly 2 months, the Germans tried to capture the building but failed. The soldiers started calling it Pavlov's house. Day and night, artillery shells fell on Stalingrad. Buildings collapsed, dust filled the air, and flames lit up the night sky. The destruction was so severe that some streets no longer existed. Soldiers had to navigate through holes in walls and jump across broken floors. The city was turning into one giant battlefield of rubble and smoke. Snipers were everywhere. Soviet snipers used rooftops, chimneys, and hidden corners to stop German advances. The most famous was Vasily Zaitsev, who became a symbol of Soviet resistance. Every shot he fired made the Germans more cautious. The city felt like it had eyes watching from every direction. German tanks were powerful in open fields but almost useless in Stalingrad's narrow, destroyed streets. Rubble blocked their movement. Snipers and anti-tank soldiers hid behind corners. Tanks often became trapped in broken roads. The Soviet fighters took advantage of this and destroyed many tanks from very close range. Some of the fighting became so close that soldiers dropped their rifles and used knives, shovels, or even their hands. Inside factories and basements, the darkness made it hard to see. Soldiers heard footsteps, breathing, and whispers. Every moment felt like a matter of life or death. It was one of the most brutal types of warfare ever seen. By October 1942, Stalingrad no longer looked like a city. It looked like a graveyard of broken buildings, destroyed vehicles, and fallen soldiers. Yet both armies kept fighting with incredible determination. The Germans believed victory was close. The Soviets believed the city must not fall. The city became a symbol of sacrifice and suffering. While the Germans were busy fighting inside Stalingrad, the Soviet High Command was preparing a huge counterattack. They understood that the German army was stretched too thin. Most German soldiers were inside the city, while the outer flanks were guarded by weaker Romanian, Hungarian, and Italian units. The Soviets planned to attack these weaker areas and surround the entire German Sixth Army. On the morning of November 19, 1942, Operation Uranus began. Thousands of Soviet artillery guns fired at the Axis defenses. The ground shook like an earthquake. After the bombardment, Soviet tanks and infantry advanced quickly, breaking through the Romanian lines. The attack was powerful and well-coordinated. The Romanian soldiers tried to resist, but they were outgunned and overwhelmed. Their weapons were outdated, and they were not prepared for such a massive assault. Within hours, their lines broke apart. Soviet tank columns rushed through the gaps, moving toward the German rear. A second Soviet attack began on the southern side of Stalingrad. This attack was also successful. Both Soviet armies, north and south, began moving toward each other. The German command realized the danger but reacted too late. On November 23, the two Soviet groups met at the town of Kalach, completing the encirclement. By November 23, more than 250,000 Axis soldiers were trapped inside Stalingrad. This included the entire German Sixth Army and parts of the 4th Panzer Army. They were surrounded on all sides, cut off from supplies and reinforcements. This moment changed the entire war on the Eastern Front. German generals suggested that the Sixth Army should break out before it was too late. But Adolf Hitler refused. He ordered them to stay and hold their ground. He believed the Luftwaffe could supply the trapped troops by air. This decision would prove to be a disaster for the German army. The German Air Force tried to fly in food, ammunition, and fuel. But winter storms, Soviet anti-aircraft guns, and overloaded aircraft made the mission almost impossible. The Sixth Army needed at least 600 tons of supplies every day, but they received less than 100 tons on most days. Soldiers began to starve. The winter of 1942-43 was brutally cold. Temperatures dropped to -30 degrees Celsius. Soldiers suffered from frostbite. Weapons froze. Many German soldiers had no winter clothing because the High Command believed the war would be over before winter arrived. Meanwhile, the Soviet soldiers were well prepared for the cold. As winter deepened, the Soviets tightened the circle around the trapped Germans. Every week, the pocket grew smaller. German hospitals overflowed with wounded soldiers. Food rations were reduced to almost nothing. Many soldiers ate frozen horse meat just to survive. By late December, German soldiers knew the truth. No rescue was coming. Their hope was fading. Many wrote final letters to their families, knowing they might not survive. The city they once hoped to conquer had become their prison. The Battle of Stalingrad was entering its final, tragic phase. In December 1942, the Germans launched a rescue attempt called Operation Winterstorm. General Manstein's army tried to break through the Soviet lines and reach the trapped Sixth Army. At first, they made some progress, but the Soviets pushed them back. They never got close enough to rescue the soldiers inside Stalingrad. Many German officers begged General Paulus to order a breakout. They said it was the only chance to save the army. But Paulus refused because Hitler had ordered him to stay in the city. Paulus followed orders strictly, even when he knew they were dangerous and unrealistic. As the weeks passed, starvation became one of the greatest killers. Soldiers received only tiny portions of bread and soup. Some days they had nothing at all. Their bodies became weak. Many could no longer fight. Hunger turned strong men into shadows. With so many wounded soldiers, and almost no medicine left, disease spread through the German ranks. Thousands suffered from frostbite, typhus, and infections. Field hospitals were overcrowded. Doctors worked day and night, but they could save only a few. On January 8, 1943, the Soviets offered the Germans a chance to surrender with honor. They promised good treatment for prisoners. But Hitler ordered Paulus to reject the offer. This decision sealed the fate of tens of thousands of soldiers trapped in the city. On January 10, the Soviets launched a massive final attack. Artillery fire shook the entire city. Soviet infantry and tanks moved forward, crushing the last German defenses. The German lines collapsed quickly because the soldiers were too weak to fight. By mid-January, the Soviet forces had divided the German pocket into two parts: the northern group and the southern group. This cut communication between German units. Each group was now isolated, fighting alone with no hope of help. Some civilians were still trapped inside Stalingrad. They hid in basements and ruined buildings. They were starving just like the soldiers. Winter winds blew through broken walls. For them, survival was almost impossible. On January 30, 1943, Hitler promoted Paulus to field marshal. No German field marshal had ever surrendered before. Hitler expected Paulus to fight to the death or commit suicide. But Paulus refused. He said he would not kill himself for Hitler. On January 31, 1943, Paulus finally surrendered the southern pocket. The northern pocket held out for 2 more days before it also surrendered. The Battle of Stalingrad was over. More than 90,000 German soldiers were taken captive. Only about 5,000 would ever return home after the war.